This is the web transcription service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. On April 20th, 2016, the Institute hosted General Daniel Allyn, the 35th Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army, who spoke to us on the topic Decisive Leadership for Coalition Operations in a Complex World.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce the 35th Vice Chief of the Staff of the United States Army, General Daniel B. Allyn.
Well, thanks very much for that warm welcome. And, you know, there's a few folks south of the border that still haven't learned what brief means. When you put people to sleep with an introduction, because I know when people read my bio to me, I get tired, and it also causes my wife to slam on my knee about, so when is it you're getting out of that uniform? But in all seriousness, many thanks for all of you coming out tonight to welcome us here, and a special thanks for lowering the threshold of entry to allow a couple of imported folks in. And it's clear that you paid more attention to my infantry bona fides than my transcript from West Point. So thank you. Because unlike my son, mine is not much to look at. But good evening, and thanks to the Royal Canadian Military Institute for inviting Debbie and me to join you tonight. To President Taylor, Inspector Brown, and all the distinguished members of the head table, Carl, you accepted, of course. It's an honor for me to be in the presence of such great leaders and friends. It has been way too long for Debbie and I since we have been north of the border. And I was going to offer my regrets for the season had by the hometown Maple Leafs until my very own Boston Bruins fell out of the playoff contention on the last game of the season. So if misery loves company, then we should enjoy our time together tonight. So no hockey discussions. And oh, by the way, let's keep baseball out as well, since both the Blue Jays and the Red Sox are fighting to keep their heads above 500 at the moment. So, in all seriousness, it's a great honor to be here with you tonight, and I'd like to begin by offering a special thank you to all the members of the Royal Canadian Military Institute and for your work to advance the common defense of our two great nations and, in fact, the free world. So thank you for what you do. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to offer my sincere congratulations to the cadets of the Royal Military College of Canada, who just 2 weeks ago bested 60 other teams from 13 countries to win the 2016 Sandhurst competition at West Point, New York. For those of you who may be surprised to hear that or are hearing it for the first time, trust me, I was a witness. I was there on the ground. It was a very cold and rainy weekend, sort of Toronto weather. Maybe that's why you guys prevailed. And your cadets proved the best at this multinational match of wit, skill, and endurance that covered 35 miles in 36 hours with full combat kit. So congratulations to those outstanding cadets from RMC. You can be very, very proud of how they performed. I hope to do three things with our time together this evening. First, I'd like to share my thoughts on the security challenges facing both of our nations and underscore the critical importance of our alliance in today's complex world. Second, I'll share a perspective on how the United States Army views the future. And finally, I'll offer my thoughts on the most important element of successful coalition operations, in my humble opinion, and that's decisive leadership. I promise to follow the timeless advice for speakers on occasions such as this. I'll be brief. I hope to offer a glimmer of brilliance, and I'll be gone. At least the third one you can be sure of. The Chief of Staff of the Army only gave me so long of a leash. Frankly, after my remarks, I hope to have not put you to sleep so that you might join me in a question or two so we can have a bit of a dialogue. Today we live in a complex and uncertain world where the velocity of instability is increasing. In Eastern Europe, Russia threatens regional stability and the security of our NATO allies. In the Pacific, China's military expansion is a challenge to our interest, while North Korea's continued aggressive posture threatens our regional allies and our partners. Across the globe, we're engaged in a war with violent extremists that preach a radical ideology and the intent to destroy our very way of life. In nearly every theater, Canadian and the United States Armed Forces work hand in hand with our allies and partners to meet these challenges head on. In the Middle East, Canadian Armed Forces have deployed CF-18s to Kuwait and Romania, where they train regional partners, while Canadian ISR and refueling aircraft support operations in Iraq and Syria. In Europe, a Canadian Army Land Task Force supports Operation Reassurance by training Romanian, Polish, and Ukrainian forces, while a Canadian Maritime Task Force supports safety of life for immigrants in the Aegean Sea. In Africa, which is near and dear to my heart because that's where my daughter is right now, Canadian forces work with the United Nations in South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo, where my daughter was last year, to train local peacekeepers and prevent the human suffering that so often acts as fertile ground for terrorist recruitment and civil strife. This leadership comes at a cost. For more than a decade, Canada stood shoulder to shoulder with the United States and our NATO allies in Afghanistan, deploying 40,000 servicemen and women, more than 150 of whom made the ultimate sacrifice. The disciple John said it best, "Greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friend." Canada's continued commitment, leadership, and sacrifice is a demonstration that she is not only one of the United States' oldest allies, contrary to that sword you tried to hand me earlier tonight. It had enemy written on it. No shit, if you haven't seen it, you ought to. But one of our most trusted friends. I witnessed the power of this friendship firsthand in Afghanistan as the commander of Combined Joint Task Force 1. Not only did the Canadian Army provide critical support to the NATO training mission, but my deputy commander for development was a Canadian officer well known to this group, Carl McQuillan. Carl's unique perspective and his ability to build and lead diverse teams were testaments to the capability and commitment of the Canadian Army, as well as invaluable assets to the coalition fighting in Afghanistan. And before this experience, I shared nearly 3 years of service with Nick Matern as our Deputy Commanding General in 18th Corps, including our support as the Joint Task Force for Haiti Earthquake Response in 2010. Invaluable teammates, and even better, lifelong friends. Today, the enduring friendship between Canada and the United States is more important than ever. We live in a complex world, and as we continue to serve in the midst of 14 years of war, it is clear there will be no peace dividend. Instead, persistent instability in an uncertain world requires our militaries to remain engaged in a variety of missions against a wide array of adversaries. In this unstable and unpredictable world, both our nations and our militaries are called to lead. We are called to lead because both Canada and the United States have shouldered the burden of international leadership for generations. Our democracies, imperfect as they are, have been models of openness. Our markets are evidence that freedom and responsibility can coexist. And our military set an example of professional, capable fighting forces. Since World War II, both the United States and Canada have used their power and influence not to blindly pursue selfish interests, but to protect and advance a liberal international order that promotes democracy and prosperity. And as a result, free peoples across the world have come to expect our leadership and depend upon our resolve. So our two nations must continue our vital efforts to stem instability and, yes, to defeat violent extremism. While it's tempting to search for an easy way to envision or describe the future, one that fits a comfortable view of how things ought to be, we would be wise to remember that such theories are at best misleading and, frankly, most often badly wrong. Former United States Secretary of Defense Robert Gates was right when he warned, and I quote, "When it comes to predicting future conflicts, we need more humility, more open minds, less certitude, and better familiarity with history." End of quote. It's precisely with a solid base of humility, open-mindedness, and familiarity with history that the United States Army has embraced the demands of a complex future. Just over a year ago, the United States Army published a new Army operating concept entitled "Win in a Complex World." The Army operating concept is designed to guide intellectual change in our Army. It guides our future force development by identifying first-order capabilities, providing the intellectual foundation for our learning, and for applying what we continue to learn as we build the future force. The Army operating concept acknowledges that the United States cannot predict who we will fight, where we will fight, or with what coalition we will fight. No matter the theater or the enemy, a foundational assumption of the Army operating concept is that the United States Army will work as part of a joint, international, and multinational team. To win in a complex world, Army forces must provide our national leaders and the joint force with multiple options. We must integrate the efforts of multiple partners, operate across multiple domains, and present our adversaries, above all else, with multiple dilemmas. Within a year of publication, we are already seeing the impact of the Army operating concept as it drives change across our Army. Force modernization proponents recently completed their analysis for future formation designs. Recent changes to our basic training and leader development strategies were informed by the demands we know our soldiers and leaders will face in a complex and uncertain world. This past fall, the Army completed its 10th iteration of network integration evaluation exercises and maneuvers at Fort Bliss, Texas. Here, concepts outlined in the Army operating concept for cyber and distributed operations are put to the test under harsh and realistic field conditions by some of the very soldiers and leaders who have the greatest stake in the outcome. Our latest iteration featured multiple joint and coalition partners, including a platoon of Canadian infantry. And next fall, Canada plans to send an infantry brigade to participate in the Army warfighting assessment, along with units from the United Kingdom, Australia, Denmark, and Italy. These are the immediate impacts of a clearly articulated long-term coalition vision. A vision which will continue to drive transformation, supported by the integration of early decisions to ensure we remain ready to win in this complex world we find ourselves in. As the United States Army continues to evolve and improve, transformation cannot be limited to systems and structure. To win in a complex world, as leaders, we must adapt the way we think and approach challenges. And one of the most important elements that shapes how leaders view future conflict is that coalition operations will be fundamental to nearly any security endeavor we undertake. Recent history has reinforced the value of coalitions and serves as evidence of what the future holds. Coalitions expand international will, bring unique perspectives to shared security challenges, and expand critical capabilities. For these reasons, operations today and in the future demand leaders who are capable and comfortable leading joint, combined, and interagency teams. In today's complex and uncertain world, traditional boundaries that allow leaders to view problems discreetly, frankly, no longer exist. In a global economy, profit and security are inextricably linked. In an interconnected world, humanitarian and foreign policies are interdependent. And regardless of role or position or nationality, decisive leaders view problems broadly, identify holistic solutions, and implement strategies to build coalitions that can transcend parochial interests. I say this with no sense of exaggeration. Creative, humble, and decisive leadership is more essential than ever before in this world we face. Challenges facing our nations remain complex. They require more innovative and comprehensive solutions and urgently demand the very best from our leaders. We need leaders with the ability to understand and relate to those of diverse backgrounds, the humility to continuously learn and adapt, and the vision to build and implement enduring strategic solutions to really tough global challenges. As those who have had the privilege of working in coalitions know, this is often easier said than done. Successful leadership in coalition operations requires the ability to build, prepare, and lead diverse teams before and during operations. Coalition operations require leaders to consult and consider the needs of broad constituencies and make decisions based on judgments about a wide range of often competing priorities. But in the end, leaders must still articulate clear objectives, ensure they are well understood and embraced by all members of the team, and then work tirelessly as a coherent team to ensure the success of the mission. And thankfully, I have witnessed how this works firsthand in both combat and peacekeeping and emergency response operations. It can and does work. Leaders in coalition operations must also constantly adapt and be willing to challenge norms. Each of us naturally approaches a challenge based on our own assumptions and understanding of the situation, shaped by our culture, shaped by our experience, and our disposition. Humble and creative leaders willingly set their inherent bias aside and intentionally seek out multiple and divergent views to test their understanding. Decisive leaders in coalition operations must routinely seek the insights of those around them. They must be willing to adapt and grow when confronted with new ideas and cultivate a culture where the team is inspired to try new ways to overcome the status quo. These attributes, guided by humility and creativity, are essential for leaders of coalition operations in the 21st century. This is a tall order, but not impossible. Leaders of character who remain humble, and demonstrate a willingness to adapt and act in unity toward common objectives will earn the respect of their coalition partners, and together will achieve mission success. These attributes are not limited to senior leaders, the ones we usually associate with coalition operations. Leaders at every echelon of our armies must be equipped to lead in complex environments. And few examples from our Army illustrate these imperatives better than that of a young First Lieutenant named Ashley Meadows from 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division, stationed now in Fort Bliss, Texas. In the summer of 2015, as part of 2nd Brigade's mission as the regionally aligned force to United States Africa Command, 1st Lieutenant Meadows led her platoon to Burkina Faso to train a Burkinabe logistics company. From June through September, 1st Lieutenant Meadows' platoon trained a logistics company to support distributed operations, a critical gap both in the Burkina Faso National Army and the African Union's capability. Throughout her time in Africa, this First Lieutenant's nearest higher headquarters was 3,600 miles away in Vicenza, Italy. Let me repeat that for those of you that were fading away. This young First Lieutenant, with about 12 non-commissioned officers, was operating 3,600 miles away from her higher headquarters. Talk about distributed operations and mission command. This is a young leader's dream. But as proof of the complex and uncertain world in which we live, First Lieutenant Meadows' training was interrupted by a coup that ousted the president of Burkina Faso, who had been in power for 27 years. In the midst of national chaos, First Lieutenant Meadows leaned on the counsel of seasoned non-commissioned officers and safely concluded her platoon's mission, maintained accountability of all her soldiers and equipment, and ensured safe evacuation 3 days later. When I met First Lieutenant Meadows this fall, I asked her what it was like to live through a coup in Africa, 3,600 miles away from her higher headquarters. Her response, frankly, was quite shocking. It was one word: awesome. I hope you were as stunned by that response as I was. Not what I would have expected, but proof that this is the kind of leader we need more of in our armies. The most impressive part of the story of Lieutenant Meadows' logistics company and the unit that she trained is that it became the only unit trusted by Burkina Faso's new president during his transition of power. And today they support the country's counterterrorism mission along its border with Mali. This is the impact of decisive leadership, capable of working with diverse partners, and proof that agile, adaptive, and creative leaders are the differential advantage in coalition operations. Lieutenant Meadows' story is representative of thousands in both of our armies and illustrates why today is an exciting time to serve as a leader in a complex world. One final thought from an old infantryman. After 35 years of leading in the United States Army and with diverse coalitions, I'm convinced of one thing more than any other: leadership matters. Across 3 decades, I've partnered with young sergeants in combat units and ministers of foreign countries. I have linked arms with business leaders to find and field the best solutions for our soldiers, and I have worked shoulder to shoulder with humanitarian leaders in earthquake-ravaged Haiti. In every instance, it was the competence, commitment, and character of decisive leaders that carried the day. This is what makes me confident that our two nations and the leaders we produce will continue to answer the call to lead the cause of freedom in this complex world. Thank you again to the leadership of the Royal Canadian Military Institute for investing in the common defense of our two great countries. Thank you again for inviting us to join you tonight and for taking the time to listen. I look forward to your questions. God bless you all, and Army Strong. Just remember, Carl and John, if it's a hard question, it's coming your way, so be ready. Yes, sir.
Brian Brulotte, I'm the honorary colonel for the Foot Guards, Governor General Foot Guards. My question has to do with where would you, in your experience, see the center of gravity in terms of headquarters or combined coalition operations? You mentioned an example at the platoon level, but would you see it at or battalion or battle group level or brigade level or division or corps? Can you speak to that?
Well, I think the most decisive, frankly, is going to be at the operational and strategic level. I think the types of challenges that we're facing right now are, for us, what we refer to as our combat commands. They are cross-boundary, they are multi-domain, they are global in terms of their impact, and they require us to, I think, harness the capabilities of all of our nations to ensure the seams and gaps that lie between our spaces are not available to be exploited by our adversaries. Now, I can give you examples at every echelon of war. I've been privileged to serve with coalition teammates, literally at the tactical, operational, and strategic level. But I think the most impactful in the near term certainly will be at the operational and the strategic level.
Question, Ed Seagram, I'm a guest of Phil Benson. What advice could you give Canadian military, especially the Army, in terms of we have less resources than the American Army? So in terms of how we should deploy our limited resources going forward in this conflicted world we live in?
Well, it is a matter of scope and scale, is it not? If you were to travel down south of the border, you wouldn't find many soldiers in the United States Army that think we're a better resource than anybody, okay? I mean, frankly, that's where we are. We're in the midst of a downsizing. You know, we've been at war for 14 years. Much of the budget increase that we enjoyed these past 14 years, has been to provide critical equipment to ensure that our vulnerabilities against a very lethal and determined adversary are eliminated quickly. So we have been wrestling with inadequate funding for the last couple of years and are facing it for a couple more for sure. In my mind, priorities are your friend in the resource-constrained environment, so you got to establish clear priorities. For our Chief of Staff of the Army, readiness is our #1 priority. So we are committed to ensure that any mission that we are given, that we provide a well-led, a well-trained, and as best equipped a force as we can to meet that mission requirement. It is our most sacred obligation. My personal bias is tough, realistic training at the tactical level. My experience is if you have leaders that understand how to fight and have the time and sufficient resources to train their soldiers to standard, you're gonna fare okay against the vast majority of the adversaries that we face. A lot of folks want to chase the silver bullet of the next piece of kit that's coming down the pipe. I would tell you that's fool's gold. You know, for my money, I would ensure that our soldiers are well resourced. I would ensure that they're well trained. I would ensure that our leadership is properly prepared, and then I would get after whatever else is left.
Thank you.
That's just my thought. Yes, sir.
Sir, you talked about communications and the fact that the young lieutenant in Burkina Faso was 3,600 miles away from higher command. That I actually think is an absolutely wonderful training ground for a young subaltern. In my career, which was in construction, I was out of sight, out of mind for much of my early career, and found out that it was a wonderful experience because you got to cut your teeth on all sorts of problems. I've also lived through the communications revolution, and now you are instantaneous contact. So when I was at the top of the pile, I found all these young kids not wishing to make a decision. How is it for being Vice Chief of Staff in the U.S. Army with a huge organization, with communications and everyone wanting to get a decision? How was that sort of communications and decision-making logjam sorted?
Well, you know, we have a doctrine called Mission Command. And at its core, Mission Command is about empowering and holding accountable leaders at echelon to make the appropriate level decisions based on vision and intent. And frankly, you know, the example of Lieutenant Meadows, were she not raised in that environment and supported by non-commissioned officers who understand how to get it done, it wouldn't have mattered if she had good communications or not. They wouldn't have gotten to the point of safe extraction, right? So, you know, my belief is that the challenge in some respects with our ability to see all at all times is that you could begin to become attracted to very centralized decision making. And when you fall prey to that, then you have a quagmire. And so we're fortunate. The Chief of Staff of our Army, you know, is a proponent of Mission Command. He expects our leaders at echelon to make the appropriate levels of decision. Now the drawback to this when you're a strategic leader is there aren't any easy decisions that come your way. Everything comes across, and you know this, I mean, it's all hard stuff. I mean, if you're making easy decisions as a strategic leader, you don't have Mission Command right. Because easy decisions should be made below you. All you should get is the hard stuff. And so that's what we're trying to do. In some cases, that's easier for us in uniform to operate in that environment than some of those we serve. But I'm not going to go into all that detail here. Yes, sir.
When you talk about sort of the new leader we're going to need for this environment in coming decades where the conditions you'll face will be constantly changing against highly variable technology, highly variable opponents, highly variable circumstances, but you still haven't talked about the most deadly opponent your leader's going to have to face, which are the people who write his rules of engagement and the people who think that somehow or other something is messy and variable, the overuse the word is conflict, can be regulated and legalized.
Yeah, there's a lot written about how rules of engagement are restricting our ability to prosecute war. I would tell you that's not my personal experience. You know, I was in Iraq when we crossed the berm in 2003, and you know, did the march to Baghdad. It did not restrict our ability to execute our operations then. I was a division commander in Afghanistan, and while the rules of engagement were more restrictive than they were when we were conducting offensive operations across the deserts of Iraq, they were adequate to enable us to prosecute the campaign that we had underway, and Carl was certainly witness to that with me. Frankly, the challenge we are facing is less about rules of engagement than it is authorities that are responsive and agile enough to enable you to stay ahead of a rapidly adapting adversary. So, and I'm not parsing words with you, they're two very different issues. I mean, rules of engagement are a set of parameters in which every soldier operates on the battlefield. Authorities are how much authority does he have to execute within those ROE. And that's the greater struggle that we face, frankly. This has ebbed and flowed over history, so it's not driven by new technology. It's really driven by what our political leadership requires of us. And at the end of the day, right, we take orders. So, I'll leave it there. Yes, sir.
Sir, Oscar Trimble, I'm curious about balancing junior leaders' preparedness, training, preparedness for the challenging threats between small wars, counterinsurgency, the FF324 stuff versus the more conventional Russian threat or threats we may face.
Yeah, that's a great question. And frankly, it's one that we have wrestled with over the last, about 4 years, because, for 14 years we have our primary adversary has required us to be masters in counterinsurgency. And while I don't know if you ever master that particular trade, you can get pretty good at it. And I think all of us have collectively gotten much better at that over the last 14 years. But in the process, our ability to prosecute combined arms maneuver against a near-peer adversary has really tapered. And when I think of the training time that was available to me as a brigade commander in 2002 in the Udari Desert, where I had a heavy brigade combat team that was fully resourced. I had no constraints on my time, and literally for 6 months, we trained from platoon to BCT live fire proficiency, all right? And frankly, we were pretty shit hot, all right? I wouldn't have wanted to face us. That's the ground truth. And that's what you can get with resources and time, right? You can get there. And so we are in the process now of restoring that level of competency at our combat training centers by fighting against a near-peer competitor adversary. Now, in some cases, that's a Eastern European variant, and in some cases, that's a Pacific variant, depending on where our brigades are stationed and postured and aligned. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of counterinsurgency. So we require our units to fight against the full spectrum of conflict in a 2-week period, where they're going to take and go toe-to-toe with a peer competitor that has all the tools that our adversaries have. And they're going to have to deal with villages where, if they do the right things, it doesn't become, an increasing burden on them while they focus on the big fight that they have to win, right? Tank on tank, etc. And the good news for you from our experience is in the first battle, the vast majority of time our platoons and companies get their noses bloodied, right? But by the second or third battle, watch out, because they learn fast. And it's very, very impressive as an old soldier to know, how slow I was to, adapt and overcome, and to watch how quickly they learn what they need to do to prevail. It's really quite impressive. But you've got to have the time, you've got to have the resources, and you've got to have the will to enable your units to get out there and fail in order to eventually prevail. There are no shortcuts, I guess, is the short answer I should have told you up front.
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Dwayne Hobbs, Canadian Forces College, sir. I'm thinking about John Lloyd and I were in Estonia and in Poland this past couple of weeks, hearing their challenges about a more assertive Russia. And the thing that I noticed was that they were really calling for a lot of heavy metal being placed in Europe. And I know that the U.S. has certainly put in brigade combat teams, and certainly the Warsaw Conference this summer is suggesting that there's going to be a reinforcement of the Baltics in Poland. But I sensed a leadership challenge, and I sensed a Soviet mentality to their own militaries, and the structure of their forces are challenged by legacy issues, heavy reliance on quasi-ready reserve forces and defense leagues that are not ready for battle. And I think about what we could provide, particularly, what makes NATO stronger. And in the context of watching the Iraqi army and the challenges of the Afghan National Army today, about what we were very good at in terms of delivering training to our allies to support their efforts. What have we learned from Iraq and Afghanistan that we could probably leverage in Eastern Europe to help professionalize those militaries, to maybe save some money in the short term or maybe even the long term, to provide some confidence to those forces in Eastern Europe?
Wow. John, are you ready to take that question?
Sir, I'll let you do that.
That sounded like a graduate thesis opportunity for you, John. Well, the good news is I've had to wrestle with this problem set for a while, so I'm with you in terms of complexity and challenge, and frankly, we're still working our way through that. I think the first thing I would say from the lessons we learned from Iraq and Afghanistan is that training a professional force takes time, right? And against the current adversary that we face in Russia, we may not have that time. Right? I can tell you the United States Army does not believe we will. We are pressing on all axes to reestablish the right stance in Eastern Europe. Because, we unfortunately, 6 or 8 years ago actually bought the bumper sticker that said, Russia wants to be part of this new alliance for a new Europe and a new world. And so we, went from a posture of 300,000 forward deployed to 30,000 forward deployed. And unfortunately, none of that is armored, right? So we've committed a armored brigade combat team on a 24/7, 365 rotation. It will be there until the cows come home, Canadian and American. And we are pressing to have another armored brigade combat team, a fires brigade capability, and a division mission command capability in pre-positioned stocks by the end of this coming fiscal year. But some decisions once made are not easily reversed, and the stance in a foreign country is one of them. So what can we do with our NATO partners? I would tell you that I don't think what we can do is expect them to stand up a trained and ready combined arms maneuver formation of the size that we need. Okay, I don't think that is a viable course of action. So I think we ought to be looking at the enabler capabilities across warfighting functions that they could actually not only acquire but train forces to fill gaps that we have against that adversary. And I know that's one of the things that we are looking at, and we would obviously welcome your thoughts and insights and sharing with NATO partners, because You know, this is going to be, if Russia decides that near abroad is something they want to fix tomorrow, they're not going to be deterred by the current stance that we have there. I mean, they weren't in Crimea, they weren't in Georgia, they weren't in the Ukraine, and they won't be in the Baltics. If they decide that that's what they must do. And so what we're trying to do is race to reestablish enough of a deterrent presence that they have to think really hard about how bad they want it. All right? Because I know we are committed to NATO Article 5, and we're going to stand by that. So I think the other part that you didn't mention that's worthy of full understanding is that the risk in the East is only the concern of a fairly small number of our NATO partners. The vast majority of our NATO nations are more worried about their southern border and the immigration risk to their countries. And that is really creating nasty tension as we try to focus them on, you know, what we consider to be the existential threat vis-a-vis a problem that you have to deal with, but it's not going to destroy your country, right? So that's easy for us to say when we're sitting over here on this side of the water, right? But I know you know that, having just come from a visit over there. So. Yes, sir.
Mike Clary, 32 Combat Engineer Regiment. From your experience in multinational operations, can you make any generalizations or comments on the comparative leadership between the countries you work with? Obviously, individuals have an enormous effect on it, but can you see any sort of national trends, strengths, weaknesses?
Well, obviously, there's some countries you're very comfortable with because you've had the opportunity to work with them multiple times. I mean, for me personally, I've been working with Canada and the UK since I was a young lieutenant. So you know, there's very little I need to do to sustain that trust, right? But I had a really unique opportunity in Afghanistan to spend a year with the Poles and the French. And while each of them was unique in their own right, if you can gain the trust of your counterpart to really have transparent dialogue, you can do a lot together as a coalition. Okay, and I'll cite one example where it worked, and I'll cite another where it didn't. And I won't mention the nations, right? And Carl will be sworn to secrecy. You know, but and frankly, you know, watching my coalition teammates was really instructive for me because they were literally taking daily calls from their nation's capital. I wasn't dealing with that, okay? I wasn't having to answer why, you know, patrol went left instead of right, and why you sent out 12 instead of 10, and, you know, why, you know, I mean, I wasn't in that kind of environment. So to your point of ROE, you know, some countries are struggling with problems that I have no comparative, you know, position to offer on. But in one particular case, we knew that because of frank dialogue, commander to commander, we knew that we were asking more of this coalition partner than their authorities would allow them to execute within the boundaries they were responsible for. So I offered them a U.S. task force, and I said, I will put this U.S. task force under your mission command, and you can use them to prosecute the missions for which you don't have the authorities to do. And they jumped all over it, okay? And as a result, we eliminated a gap and a seam that was starting to develop, right? In another case, for whatever reason, that transparency was not permissible. And though I knew from watching that their restrictions were preventing them from prosecuting what was needed to be done to deny the adversary operational space, it was unacceptable for them to, accept either additional forces from us, additional capabilities from us, or reducing the footprint so that we could pick up additional space. That was very problematic. And frankly, I lacked the leadership ability to resolve it. Mark it on the list of stuff you failed at, but you learned a lot from. But my experience is, and particularly what I found to be invaluable as you're forming a coalition team, is start that team development on this side of the crisis, right? So we had the opportunity to bring our coalition partners together at Fort Hood, Texas, as we were forming our team to go to Afghanistan and get to know each other personally, socially, and in a training environment, and develop that trust before we went across and actually got into harm's way. And as I was sharing here at the head table, you really can't surge trust. You got to build it and then lean on it over time. Because in a crisis, it's got to be there. You can't build it in a crisis. Long answer to a fairly straightforward question. I suspect the hook has come.
No, sir, it has not. I would suggest that we're down to last two questions, though. If I could, I think Pat may have something he wants to ask.
I'll set the stage first of all. I think, probably talking to Dave Anderson, we're in the start of a defense policy review in this country. And the government will look at issues of what we should be doing, and they'll actually resource it at the end of that. So it's important, and it hasn't happened since 1994. 1994, right? So it's actually important. So that's the first part you need to understand. The second is, I've served in this city a number of times. I'm not of this city, I'm not of this organization. But here's what I know when I used to work on the staff of the divisional commander here. If he goofed up, somebody from this institute would call the Prime Minister of Canada and probably by first name would say, I'm not happy with the following thing. So people in this room, or people associated with people in this room, probably have that contact and that ability to say something out loud. In the policy review, they will actually ask Canadians and people like this, what do you think Canada should be doing the next go-around? You use the word coalition a whole bunch of times. I've served with you. A bunch of Canadians have and loved it. So with that background, when you sit around the table in the Pentagon and you're trying to build a coalition and you're looking for a capability, a fill gap, whether it's in Eastern, or the Baltic nations, Eastern NATO, or it's in Iraq or somewhere else, what basic things would you be looking for from Canada? Because somebody in this room will say it to important people.
Yeah. Well, I would offer to you, there's only a few nations in the world that can build combined arms maneuver capable forces, and this is one of them, right? There's a lot of nations out there that are willing to offer up enablers, ISR, aircraft, that standoff capability. At the end of the day, crises are resolved on land, where infantry forces deal with other, adversaries face to face, and ultimately have to prevail. And so, if I were to offer to you what would Ish think was worthy of a conversation, it would be to retain that commitment to developing some level of combined arms maneuver capability, because I know the history of this great nation and its capacity to do so. And I believe the will that lies within this room. So that would be my offer, Carl.
And last question, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone else?
Good evening, sir. Lieutenant Colonel David Lafreniere, CEO of the Windsor Regiment. Reflecting on one of your first comments about the sword and how you turn, how enemies become friends, and thinking on that special relationship that the U.S. has enjoyed with Great Britain, and how it went from a relationship of tyrant and oppressed to one where one world power handed over the keys to the next world power peacefully. If I can ask you to reflect and think, with China rising, what's the U.S. Army's thought on sharing space and allowing China to occupy some space in the future peacefully?
Yeah, and again, this is Dan Allyn talking, not General Allyn. Okay, so this is my personal opinion, and my belief is that China as an adversary is a choice, right? You know, I'm not sure we'll have that choice with Russia, given where they are and the time horizon of their ability to establish themselves, given the economic situation that they're in. I think that one is a gamble, right? I think our relationship with China is a risk, and I believe it is a risk that must be managed with an eye toward enabling a competitive versus adversarial long-term relationship. I don't say that with a Pollyannish set of rose-colored glasses. I mean, frankly, what they're doing right now in the South China Sea and other places around the globe is quite assertive. But if you look at the why, right, you can somewhat understand what it is they're trying to do. And my belief is that there is the potential to manage that. Now I can tell you there are many in my uniform and those we work for that don't share that view. But that's, you know, certainly mine and my bosses, my chief. That's our perspective, and it's beyond. I mean, it's from a study of history and a belief in the fact that the last thing, certainly in the next 2 decades, that China wants is to go to war with the United States or our allies. Okay, that's not what they want. All right, and given that they don't want that, my belief is we ought to be working, you know, very, very tough as a coalition to prevent that from happening, as well as counter some of their assertive actions that are beginning to border on aggressive actions. So hopefully that helps. I know I'm about to get kicked off the stage here, but could I get Jim Lutz to come up here for just a minute? You know, in the United States, we are quite proud, as Canadians are, of what your soldiers do for the nation. And one of the great privileges that I have as the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army is to go around predominantly the United States, but also obviously north and south of the border, and recognize soldiers who are continuing to do great work in representing the United States of America and representing the United States Army. So I would like to adorn you with your Soldier for Life pin, with the only expectation that the next time I see you, Jim, you better be wearing it.
This has been another in the ongoing series of podcasts brought to you as an educational service of the Royal Canadian Military Institute. You can keep abreast of our web offerings as well as our live events by visiting our website at www.rcmi.org. Once again, this is Eric Morse saying thank you for being with us and good night.